Maria Santos wiped down the same greasy table for the third time that morning, watching the steam rise from fresh coffee cups while the October sun struggled through the diner's smudged windows. At 19, she had already spent 2 years serving eggs over easy and listening to truckers complain about gas prices at Mel's Diner in Bakersfield, California. The job paid enough to help her mother with rent, but barely enough to dream beyond the city limits. The morning rush had died down when the recruitment poster caught her eye. Someone had left a crumpled Marine Corps flyer on table 6, right next to an empty syrup bottle and some scattered sugar packets. The bold letters read "The Few," the proud above an image of Marines in dress blues. Maria picked it up, studying the faces of the men and women who stared back at her with steel in their eyes. She had always been different from her classmates. While other girls in high school talked about college plans or wedding dreams, Maria spent weekends at her uncle's ranch, learning to shoot cans off fence posts with his old hunting rifle. Her hands never shook, her breathing stayed steady, and she rarely missed. Uncle Roberto always said she had a gift, but gifts don't pay bills in small towns where opportunities are as scarce as rain. The diner bell chimed as Staff Sergeant Williams walked in, his uniform crisp despite the California heat. He was a tall black man with kind eyes and the confident stride of someone who had seen the world beyond these dusty streets. Maria had been watching him come in every Tuesday for 6 months, always ordering the same thing, black coffee and wheat toast, no butter. He always left exactly 15% tip and never made small talk. Today felt different. As Maria refilled his coffee cup, Sergeant Williams looked up from his newspaper and spoke directly to her for the first time. "You ever think about serving your country, miss?" The question hit Maria like a surprise punch. She glanced around the nearly empty diner, wondering if he was talking to someone else. "Me? I never really thought about it. Name's Williams. I'm a Marine recruiter." He pulled out a business card, setting it next to his coffee cup. "I've been watching you work for months. You handle pressure well, stay calm when things get busy. You treat everyone with respect, even when they don't deserve it. Those are qualities we need." Maria stared at the card, her heart beating faster. "I don't know anything about the military. That's what we're for. To teach you." Williams sipped his coffee slowly. "What do you know about yourself?" The question seemed simple, but Maria found herself really thinking about it. What did she know about herself? She knew she could hit a tin can from 50 yards away. She knew she wasn't afraid of hard work. She knew she wanted something more than wiping down tables for the rest of her life, but she had never known what that something might be. "I know I can shoot," she said quietly. Williams raised an eyebrow. "Can you now?" "My uncle taught me. I'm pretty good at it." "Pretty good doesn't cut it in the Corps. We need the best." He leaned back in his booth, studying her carefully. "Tell you what. There's a shooting range about 20 minutes from here. You free this afternoon?" Maria's shift ended at 2 o'clock. She had planned to go home, help her mother fold laundry, and watch television until bedtime. The same routine she had followed for 2 years. But something about the way Williams looked at her made her feel like maybe she was capable of more than routine. "I guess I could be." That afternoon, Maria found herself at Bakersfield Shooting Sports, holding a rifle that felt familiar in her hands despite being different from Uncle Roberto's old gun. Williams stood behind her as she lined up her first shot at a target 25 yards away. "Take your time. Breathe steady. Squeeze, don't pull." Maria had heard these instructions 100 times before. She settled into her stance, feeling the weight of the rifle against her shoulder. The range was busy, with other shooters firing around her, but she blocked out every sound except her own heartbeat. She took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, and Williams called for a ceasefire to check targets. When they walked down range, Maria's bullet had punched through the center of the bullseye, leaving a perfect hole in the black circle. "Lucky shot," Williams said, but she could see the interest in his eyes. "Maybe," Maria replied, loading another round. She fired 4 more times. 4 more bullseyes. Not near the center, but dead center. Williams stopped calling them lucky shots after the third one. On the drive back to the diner, Williams talked about opportunities. He talked about training that would challenge her in ways she had never imagined. He talked about seeing places beyond California, about learning skills that would set her apart from everyone she had ever known. He talked about being part of something bigger than herself. But what really caught Maria's attention was when he mentioned the Marine Corps shooting team. Every year, we send our best marksmen to competitions around the world. They represent the finest shooters in the entire military. It's an honor very few Marines ever achieve. Maria stared out the passenger window at the familiar landscape of her hometown. The same buildings, the same streets, the same limited horizons she had known all her life. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine something different. That night, Maria sat at her kitchen table with her mother, Rosa, explaining what had happened. Rosa Santos had cleaned houses and taken care of other people's children for 20 years to provide for her daughter. The idea of Maria leaving for the military terrified her. Mija, the military is dangerous. What if something happens to you? What if nothing happens to me if I stay here? Maria replied. What if I spend the next 20 years serving coffee and clearing tables? What if I never find out what I'm really capable of? Rosa studied her daughter's face, seeing a determination that reminded her of Maria's father, who had died when Maria was 12. He had always said their daughter was meant for something special, though he had never lived to see what that might be. If this is what you want, I will support you. But, promise me you'll be careful. Maria promised, though they both knew that being careful and being a Marine might not always be the same thing. 3 weeks later, Maria Santos raised her right hand in a federal building in Fresno and took the oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. The girl who had spent 2 years refilling coffee cups was about to discover what she was really made of. The bus ride to Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego took 4 hours, giving Maria plenty of time to second-guess her decision. She watched California roll past her window, knowing that everything familiar was falling behind her. The girl sitting next to her was from Los Angeles, talking nervously about what boot camp would be like. 2 rows back, a young man from Phoenix kept checking his phone until the signal died somewhere outside the city. Everyone on that bus had their own reasons for being there. Some wanted to serve their country. Others needed structure in their lives. A few were running from problems they couldn't solve at home. Maria wasn't running from anything. She was running toward something, though she couldn't quite name what that something was yet. When the bus pulled through the gates of the recruit depot, Maria felt her stomach clench with nervousness and excitement. Drill instructors and campaign covers were already shouting instructions before the engine stopped running. This was it. No turning back now. The first few weeks of boot camp were exactly as brutal as everyone had warned her they would be. Maria learned to march in formation, to keep her rifle spotless, to make her bunk so tight a quarter would bounce off the blankets. She learned to push her body beyond limits she didn't know she had, to function on 4 hours of sleep and pure determination. But she also learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands, Maria found herself adapting quickly. The early morning runs that left others gasping for breath felt natural to her. The obstacle courses that seemed impossible on the first attempt became routine by the 10th. Her body responded to the training as if it had been waiting for this challenge her entire life. The academic portions of boot camp came easily too. Maria had always been smart, but high school had never challenged her to use her intelligence fully. Here, she learned about military history, tactics, first aid, and equipment maintenance. She absorbed information like a sponge, eager to prove she belonged among these Marines. But it was on the rifle range that Maria truly found her place. The first time she held an M16 service rifle, Maria felt something click into place. It was different from Uncle Roberto's hunting rifle, more precise and powerful, but the fundamentals were the same. Breathe. Sight. Squeeze. Follow through. Her drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Jackson, was a tough woman from Alabama who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. She had seen hundreds of recruits come through her training cycle, and she knew within minutes who had potential and who would struggle. When Maria stepped up to the firing line for her first qualification attempt, Jackson watched carefully. The recruit's stance was good, her grip was proper, and something about her stillness suggested natural ability. But Jackson had learned not to get excited about recruits until she saw them perform under pressure. Santos, you're up. Make it count. Maria settled into her position, adjusting the sling and checking her sight picture. The targets were 300 yards away, barely visible to most recruits on their first attempt. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she immediately knew the shot was good. She fired 9 more rounds in quick succession, each one feeling perfect as it left the barrel. When the targets were scored, Maria had fired a 98 out of 100, missing expert qualification by only 2 points. Jackson tried to hide her surprise, but Maria could see the approval in her drill instructor's eyes. "Not bad for a first-timer, Santos. Let's see if you can do it again." Over the following weeks, Maria's scores continued to improve. She qualified expert on her second attempt and never scored below expert again. Other recruits began to notice her consistency, and even the drill instructors started using her as an example of proper shooting technique. But Maria was learning that marksmanship was about more than just hitting targets. It was about control under pressure, about making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death in combat. It was about being reliable when others were counting on you. As boot camp progressed, Maria discovered that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not just a job or a career, but a calling. She was becoming part of something larger than herself, part of a tradition that dated back to the founding of the Corps in 1775. Graduation day arrived with typical California sunshine. Maria's mother had driven down from Bakersfield to watch her daughter become a Marine. Rosa Santos barely recognized the confident young woman in dress blues who stood at attention with her platoon. 3 months ago, her daughter had been a girl serving coffee. Now she was a United States Marine, and the transformation was impossible to miss. As they pinned the eagle, globe, and anchor on Maria's uniform, she thought about the shooting range where this journey had begun. She remembered Williams asking her what she knew about herself, and how little she had been able to answer at the time. Now she knew much more. She knew she could push her body and mind beyond their apparent limits. She knew she could work as part of a team while maintaining her individual excellence. She knew she could hit targets that others couldn't even see clearly. But, most importantly, she knew that she had found her place in the world. The bus ride to Camp Pendleton, where Maria would receive advanced training, felt completely different from that first nervous trip to boot camp. She was no longer running toward an unknown future. She was moving confidently toward the next phase of a journey that was just beginning. As the California landscape rolled past her window, Maria Santos allowed herself to wonder what challenges and opportunities waited ahead. She had proven she could become a Marine. Now she would discover what kind of Marine she was meant to be. The answer to that question would come sooner than she expected, on a foggy night when the stakes were higher than anyone realized, and Maria would need every skill she had learned to prove that sometimes the most important shots are the ones nobody expects you to make. Camp Pendleton sprawled across the California coast like a small city dedicated entirely to turning Marines into warriors. Maria Santos arrived on a Monday morning in November, her sea bag slung over her shoulder and her newly earned eagle, globe, and anchor gleaming on her collar. The base was bigger than anything she had ever seen, with ranges stretching toward the horizon and the constant sound of training exercises echoing across the hills. Her first assignment was to the School of Infantry, where she would learn the advanced skills that separated Marines from other military branches. While the Army had soldiers and the Navy had sailors, the Marines had riflemen. Every Marine, regardless of their eventual job specialty, was trained to fight as infantry first. Maria was about to discover what that really meant. The barracks at SOI were different from boot camp. The drill instructors were still tough, but they treated the new Marines more like students and less like clay to be molded. These Marines had already proven they could meet basic standards. Now they needed to learn the complex skills that would keep them alive in combat. Maria's bunkmate was a tall redhead named Kelly Murphy from Boston, who had joined the Marines to pay for college and planned to study engineering after her enlistment. Kelly was smart and tough, but she struggled with marksmanship in a way that frustrated her immensely. "I can calculate the trajectory of a projectile in my head," Kelly muttered after another disappointing day on the range. "I understand the physics of ballistics better than most people understand basic math. So why can't I hit the broadside of a barn?" Maria was cleaning her rifle at the time, a nightly ritual she had perfected during boot camp. Understanding something and doing something are different skills. You think too much when you shoot. What do you mean I think too much? You're calculating when you should be feeling. Shooting is about instinct and muscle memory. When you think about every variable, you're fighting against your natural ability to aim. Kelly looked skeptical. That sounds like mystical nonsense. Want me to show you? The next morning, during personal time before classes started, Maria took Kelly to one of the practice ranges. The fog was rolling in from the Pacific, creating patches of limited visibility that made shooting more challenging. Maria set up targets at varying distances, some partially obscured by the morning mist. First, just shoot the way you normally do, Maria instructed. Think about everything you've learned and try to apply it. Kelly took her position, adjusted her sights, calculated wind direction and bullet drop, and fired 5 careful shots. When they checked the targets, the shots were scattered around the bullseye, technically acceptable but not impressive. Now try something different, Maria said. Don't think about the science. Just look at the target and trust your hands to put the bullet where you're looking. That doesn't make any sense. Neither does overthinking a skill your body already knows how to perform. Kelly grudgingly agreed to try Maria's approach. This time, instead of calculating angles and adjustments, she simply looked at the center of the target and let her body settle into a natural position. She fired 5 more shots, faster than before and with less conscious thought about technique. The difference was remarkable. All 5 shots were clustered in the center ring, a significant improvement over her previous attempt. How did you learn this? Kelly asked, staring at her target in amazement. From my uncle, but he probably learned it from someone else. Good shooters have been teaching the same principles for generations. Consistency, breathing, and trusting your instincts. Word of Maria's teaching ability spread quickly among the Marines in her training company. Soon, she was spending her free time helping other students improve their marksmanship. The instructors noticed this informal tutoring and began asking Maria to demonstrate techniques during formal classes. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, the chief marksmanship instructor, was a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan who had been teaching Marines to shoot for 12 years. He recognized natural talent when he saw it, and Maria Santos had more raw ability than any student he had encountered in recent memory. Santos, I want to talk to you about your future, Rodriguez said after a particularly impressive demonstration of long-range shooting. Have you ever heard of the Marine Corps shooting team? Maria had heard Williams mention it during their first conversation at the diner, but she didn't know much about what the team actually did. It's a competitive unit based in Quantico, Rodriguez explained. They represent the Corps in shooting competitions around the world. Making the team is one of the highest honors a Marine marksman can achieve. It also opens doors for advanced training and leadership opportunities that most Marines never get access to. The idea excited Maria, but she tried not to show too much enthusiasm. She had learned that in the military, seeming too eager could sometimes work against you. What would I need to do? First, you'd need to complete your current training here with top scores in everything, not just marksmanship. The shooting team wants Marines who excel in all areas, not just one specialty. Then, you'd need to attend advanced marksmanship courses and compete in regional competitions to prove you can perform under pressure. Rodriguez pulled out a thick manual from his desk. This is the curriculum for the Advanced Marksmanship course at Quantico. It covers precision shooting techniques most Marines never learn. If you're serious about pursuing this opportunity, start studying this material now. That night, Maria began reading about ballistics concepts that went far beyond basic marksmanship. She learned about atmospheric conditions that could affect bullet trajectory over long distances. She studied different types of ammunition and how their characteristics changed in various weather conditions. She read about the psychology of competitive shooting and how to maintain concentration during extended competitions. The material was challenging, but Maria found herself absorbing the information easily. Everything built on the foundation of skills she had been developing since childhood, but at a level of sophistication she had never imagined. As her training at SOI progressed, Maria excelled in every subject. She mastered urban combat techniques, learned to operate complex communications equipment, and demonstrated leadership potential that impressed even demanding instructors. But it was her performance on the advanced rifle range that truly set her apart. The final test of the marksmanship portion of SOI was a challenging course that required students to engage targets at distances ranging from 100 to 500 yards, in various weather conditions and time constraints. Most Marines considered it one of the most difficult practical tests they would face in their military careers. Maria approached the test with confidence, but she also knew that overconfidence could be dangerous. She had seen excellent Marines fail important tests because they assumed their natural ability would carry them through without proper preparation. The morning of the test, California weather provided an additional challenge in the form of heavy fog rolling in from the ocean. Visibility was reduced to about 200 yards in most areas of the range, with some sections completely obscured by thick gray mist. "This is about as bad as conditions get," Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez announced to the assembled Marines. "In real combat, you don't get to wait for perfect weather. You engage targets when and where you find them, regardless of visibility." The course was designed to simulate combat conditions as realistically as possible. Marines would move through different positions, engaging targets that appeared at various distances and angles. Some targets were fully visible, others were partially concealed behind barriers or obscured by fog. Time limits added pressure that tested not just accuracy, but decision-making under stress. Maria was assigned to fire in the third group, which gave her an opportunity to observe how other Marines approached the challenge. She watched as skilled marksmen she had trained with struggled to locate targets in the fog. Even Marines who normally shot expert scores were having difficulty adapting to the limited visibility. When her turn came, Maria approached the first firing position with a clear mental plan. She would not try to force shots she couldn't make confidently. Better to take more time with each engagement than to rush and miss targets entirely. The first target appeared at 300 yards, partially visible through a gap in the fog. Maria settled into her position, controlled her breathing, and waited for a moment when the mist cleared enough to reveal the entire target. When that moment came, she took the shot immediately. Hit. The second engagement was more challenging. Multiple targets at different distances, all barely visible through the heavy fog. Maria had to prioritize which targets to engage first based on their threat level and her confidence in making the shots. She chose the closest target first, then worked her way out to longer distances. Hit. 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 As the course progressed, Maria fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite the challenging conditions. She trusted her training, trusted her equipment, and, most importantly, trusted her ability to make good decisions under pressure. When fog completely obscured a target, she waited patiently for visibility to improve rather than taking low-percentage shots. By the time she reached the final firing position, Maria had successfully engaged every target she had attempted. The last challenge was the most difficult, a single target at 500 yards, barely visible through swirling fog, with a time limit that was counting down rapidly. Maria settled into her position and studied the target through her scope. She could see it intermittently as the fog shifted, but she needed a clear shot to be confident of success. The time pressure was significant, but she forced herself to wait for the right moment. With 15 seconds remaining, the fog cleared just enough to reveal the full target. Maria took her shot without hesitation. Hit. When the final scores were announced, Maria Santos had achieved a perfect score under some of the most challenging conditions anyone could remember. Rodriguez pulled her aside after the formal debriefing. "Santos, I've been teaching Marines to shoot for 12 years. I've never seen a performance like that under these conditions. You're ready for the next level." 2 weeks later, Maria received orders to report to Quantico for the advanced marksmanship course. She would be leaving California for the first time in her life, heading to Virginia to train with the best shooters in the Marine Corps. The night before she left Camp Pendleton, Maria called her mother from the base phone center. "Mija, I'm so proud of you," Rosa Santos said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "Your uncle Roberto would be amazed to see how far you've taken the skills he taught you." "I'm nervous, Mama. This is a big opportunity, but the competition is going to be incredible. These are Marines who have been shooting competitively for years. You've never backed down from a challenge yet. Don't start now." As Maria packed her belongings for the trip to Quantico, she reflected on how much had changed since that morning in the diner when Staff Sergeant Williams had first asked her about serving her country. She had discovered abilities she didn't know she possessed and earned opportunities she had never imagined possible. But she also knew that the real tests were still ahead of her. Advanced training would be more demanding than anything she had experienced so far. The other Marines in her course would be the best marksmen from bases around the world, all competing for limited spots on elite shooting teams. Maria Santos was ready for the challenge. She had learned to trust her abilities, to perform under pressure, and to help others improve their skills. Now she would discover whether she had what it took to compete at the highest levels of military marksmanship. The bus ride to the airport took her through the hills of Camp Pendleton one last time. As California disappeared behind her, Maria looked ahead toward Virginia and whatever challenges waited there. She had come a long way from the diner in Bakersfield, but she suspected the journey was just beginning. What Maria didn't know was that her reputation had preceded her to Quantico. The instructors there had already heard about the young Marine from California who could shoot expert scores in heavy fog and who had a gift for teaching others. They were curious to see if she could live up to the stories that had reached them. More importantly, they were about to find out whether Maria Santos had the mental toughness to handle the pressure that came with being the best. Because at Quantico, natural talent was just the starting point. What mattered was what you could do with that talent when everything was on the line and the whole Marine Corps was watching. The plane lifted off from San Diego, carrying Maria toward the next chapter of her story. Below her, California grew smaller until it disappeared entirely, but the lessons she had learned there would stay with her forever. In a few days, she would be competing with the finest marksmen the Marines had to offer. She was ready to find out just how good she really was. The Marine Corps base at Quantico, Virginia, felt different from Camp Pendleton the moment Maria stepped off the bus. Where California had been sprawling and casual, Quantico was compact and intense. Every building seemed designed with purpose, every pathway led somewhere important, and the Marines walking between facilities carried themselves with the confidence of people who knew they were among the best. Maria's first stop was the Advanced Marksmanship Unit, housed in a complex of buildings near the Weapons Training Battalion. The facility looked modern and sophisticated, with indoor ranges equipped with electronic scoring systems and classrooms filled with ballistics computers that could calculate trajectory variables in real time. Staff Sergeant Chen, the course director, was a small Asian American woman whose compact frame concealed the steady hands of a world-class marksman. She had represented the United States in international competitions and held multiple Marine Corps shooting records. When she shook Maria's hand during check-in, her grip was firm and her eyes were evaluating. "Santos, right? From California. I've heard interesting things about your performance at SOI." Chen consulted a folder containing Maria's training records. "Expert scores in heavy fog conditions. That's impressive, but you should know that everyone here has impressive credentials. The question is whether you can maintain that level of performance when you're competing against Marines who are just as good as you are." The advanced marksmanship course lasted 8 weeks and covered shooting techniques that most Marines never learned. Maria would study advanced ballistics, learn to engage targets at distances exceeding 1,000 yards, and master the use of specialized equipment that could compensate for environmental variables like wind, temperature, and atmospheric pressure. Her classmates were 15 other Marines selected from bases around the world. There was Sergeant Williams from North Carolina, who had won regional competitions as a civilian before enlisting. Corporal Jackson from Texas had grown up hunting and could estimate range to within 5 yards using only his naked eye. Lance Corporal Park from Hawaii had qualified expert with every weapon system the Marines used. Maria quickly realized that her natural talent, which had made her exceptional at previous assignments, was simply the entry requirement here. Everyone in the course could shoot expert scores consistently. The question was who could push beyond expert level to achieve the precision required for international competition. The first week consisted of classroom instruction that covered ballistics theory at a level Maria had never encountered. She learned about the Magnus effect, which caused spinning bullets to drift in predictable patterns. She studied atmospheric density changes that could affect bullet trajectory over extreme distances. She memorized ballistics tables for different types of ammunition under various conditions. The academic work was challenging, but Maria found herself adapting quickly to the intellectual demands. Her experience helping other Marines at SOI had taught her to think about shooting technique in analytical terms, which prepared her well for the theoretical portions of the course. The practical training began in the second week on ranges that stretched farther than Maria had ever shot before. The 1,000-yard line was barely visible without magnification, and hitting targets at that distance required skills that went far beyond basic marksmanship. Instructor Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, a veteran of 3 deployments who held multiple Marine Corps records, explained the fundamentals of extreme long-range shooting. At these distances, everything matters. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the Earth becomes a factor you have to account for. A small error in any of these calculations will cause you to miss by several feet. Maria's first attempts at 1,000-yard shooting were humbling. Shots that would have been perfect hits at shorter distances missed the target entirely. The variables she needed to account for were more complex than anything she had dealt with before, and the margin for error was unforgiving. But Maria approached the challenge with the same patience and determination that had served her well in previous training. She studied her misses carefully, worked with instructors to understand what had gone wrong, and gradually began to develop an intuitive understanding of how environmental factors affected bullet trajectory. By the end of the third week, Maria was hitting targets consistently at 1,000 yards. Her natural shooting ability, combined with intense study and practice, was producing results that impressed even experienced instructors. She was not the best student in the course, but she was clearly among the top performers. The real test came in week 4, when students began competing against each other in structured competitions that simulated the pressure of actual matches. These exercises were designed to identify Marines who could maintain their skills under stress, when prize money or national representation was on the line. The first competition was a precision match that required students to engage targets at various distances under time pressure. Points were awarded for accuracy, with penalties for missed shots or failure to complete the course within time limits. Maria approached the competition with the same systematic preparation that had become her trademark. She studied the course layout in advance, identifying the most challenging shots and planning how to manage her time effectively. She practiced the required positions until they became automatic, so she could focus on shooting rather than struggling with unfamiliar techniques. On the day of the competition, Virginia weather added an extra element of challenge. A steady wind was blowing across the range at about 15 miles per hour, with gusts that reached 25. These conditions would test every student's ability to read wind patterns and adjust their shots accordingly. Maria was assigned to fire in the second relay, which meant she could observe the first group of shooters and learn from their experience. She watched carefully as Marines she knew to be excellent marksmen struggled with the wind conditions. Several shots that appeared to be perfect were blown wide by unexpected gusts. When her turn came, Maria settled into the first position with a clear mental plan. She would not rush her shots, even if it meant finishing closer to the time limit. Better to fire fewer accurate shots than more shots that missed their targets. The first target was at 300 yards, a distance Maria could normally hit easily. But the crosswind was tricky, switching direction unpredictably as it swirled around the range buildings. Maria took her time, waiting for a moment when the wind seemed steady, then made her adjustment and fired. Hit! The second position required her to engage targets at 600 yards, where wind effects were more pronounced. Maria had learned to watch for visual indicators that revealed wind patterns, the movement of flags, grass, and trees that showed not just wind speed but also changes in direction that could affect bullet trajectory. She took 3 shots from this position, all hits, then moved to the final and most challenging position. The 1,000-yard shots were the test that separated good shooters from great ones. At this distance, a small error in wind estimation could cause a miss by several feet. Maria settled into her prone position and studied the conditions carefully through her spotting scope. The wind was gusty and inconsistent, but Maria noticed a pattern in the way flags were moving at different distances downrange. The wind near the firing line was stronger than at the target, creating a complex ballistic problem that required precise calculation. She made her adjustments and fired her first shot. The bullet struck just outside the 10 ring, a good hit but not perfect. Maria analyzed what had happened, made a small adjustment to her windage estimate, and fired again. This time, the bullet struck dead center. Her final 2 shots were also 10s, giving her a nearly perfect score on the most challenging portion of the course. When all students had completed the competition, Maria finished second overall, behind only Sergeant Williams from North Carolina. Staff Sergeant Chen pulled Maria aside after the scores were announced. "Santos, that was excellent shooting under difficult conditions. You showed good judgment in managing your time and excellent wind reading skills. But I want you to understand something about competitive shooting that goes beyond technical skills." Maria listened carefully as Chen explained the psychological challenges that came with high-level competition. When you're representing the Marine Corps in international competition, you're not just shooting for yourself. You're carrying the reputation of every Marine who has ever worn the uniform. That kind of pressure can affect even the most skilled marksman. The question isn't whether you can shoot well in training. The question is whether you can shoot well when it matters most. 2 weeks later, Maria faced exactly that kind of pressure in the course's final examination, a 3-day competition that would determine which students would be recommended for Marine Corps shooting teams. The competition drew observers from throughout the Marine Corps. Officers from Headquarters Marine Corps attended to evaluate potential team members. Previous Marine Corps shooting champions came to watch the next generation of marksmen compete. Maria's performance during these 3 days would determine whether she achieved her goal of making the shooting team or returned to a regular infantry unit. The first day tested precision shooting at known distances. Students would engage targets at 200, 300, 600, and 1,000 yards, with scores recorded for each distance. Weather conditions were perfect: no wind, clear skies, and comfortable temperatures that eliminated most environmental variables. Maria approached the first day with confidence. These were the conditions where her natural talent gave her the greatest advantage. She had consistently shot high scores at all distances during training, and the calm weather meant she could focus purely on technique rather than compensating for environmental factors. Her performance on the first day was nearly flawless. She shot perfect scores at 200 and 300 yards, dropped only 2 points at 600 yards, and achieved one of the highest 1,000-yard scores in the course's recent history. She finished the day in first place overall, ahead of Marines who had been shooting competitively for years. The second day was designed to test adaptability and stress management. Students would engage targets at unknown distances, requiring them to estimate range and make ballistic calculations under time pressure. Weather conditions would be deliberately challenging, and targets would appear at irregular intervals to prevent shooters from developing a rhythm. Virginia cooperated by providing exactly the kind of challenging weather the instructors wanted. Heavy rain reduced visibility and created unpredictable wind patterns. Temperatures dropped 20 degrees from the previous day, affecting bullet trajectory in ways students would need to calculate quickly. Maria's systematic approach served her well under these conditions. While other students struggled to adapt to the changing variables, she treated each shot as an individual problem to be solved. She took time to estimate range carefully, made conservative adjustments for weather conditions, and fired only when she was confident of success. Her patience was rewarded with consistent hits throughout the day, even as other top students missed targets they would normally hit easily. By the end of the second day, Maria had maintained her lead and was beginning to believe that making the shooting team might be more than just a hope. The final day would test her ability to perform under the ultimate pressure. Students would compete in a match that simulated the conditions of international competition, with formal scoring, official observers, and the knowledge that their performance would directly determine their military futures. Maria spent the evening before the final day reviewing her notes from the previous weeks. She had recorded observations about her shooting technique, environmental conditions that affected her performance, and lessons learned from each training session. This systematic approach had become her method for continuous improvement. She also spent time managing the mental pressure she was feeling. The opportunity to make the Marine Corps shooting team represented everything she had worked toward since that conversation with Staff Sergeant Williams at the diner. The possibility of failure was terrifying, but Maria had learned to channel nervous energy into focused concentration. The morning of the final day dawned clear and cold, with light winds that would test shooters' ability to make precise adjustments. As Maria prepared her equipment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 18 months ago, she had been serving coffee in Bakersfield. Now she was competing for a position on one of the most elite teams in the Marine Corps. The competition began at 0800 with precision shots at 300 yards. Maria's first shot was a perfect 10, settling her nerves and establishing the rhythm she would need to maintain for the entire day. Shot after shot, position after position, she executed the techniques she had learned with mechanical precision. But, as the day progressed and the pressure mounted, Maria began to understand what Staff Sergeant Chen had meant about psychological challenges. Knowing that officers were watching her every shot, that her performance would be analyzed and compared to other Marines, created a level of stress that was different from anything she had experienced in training. Some students cracked under this pressure, shooting scores well below their training averages. Others maintained their technical skills but lost the mental edge that separated good performance from great performance. Maria found a way to channel the pressure into even greater focus. Instead of being intimidated by the observers, she used their presence as motivation to demonstrate the skills she had worked so hard to develop. Each shot became an opportunity to prove that she belonged among the elite marksmen of the Marine Corps. As the competition entered its final phase, Maria was tied for first place with Sergeant Williams. The last 10 shots would determine which of them would be recommended for the shooting team with the strongest endorsement. The final position required shooters to engage targets at 1,000 yards in prone position, the ultimate test of marksmanship skills. Wind conditions had become more challenging throughout the day, and the afternoon sun was creating heat mirages that made the targets appear to shimmer and dance. Maria settled into her position and began the mental process she had perfected over months of training. She read the wind conditions at multiple points downrange, calculated the ballistic solution for the current atmospheric conditions, and prepared to execute 10 shots that would define her military career. Her first shot was a perfect 10. Her second shot struck slightly outside the 10 ring, still an excellent hit but not quite perfect. Maria adjusted her technique slightly and continued shooting. Shot after shot, Maria maintained the concentration that had become her trademark. She was aware that Sergeant Williams was shooting well beside her, but she blocked out everything except her own performance. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed about since learning that such opportunities existed. When the shooting was complete and targets were scored, Maria Santos had achieved something remarkable. Not only had she won the overall competition, but she had set a new course record for the Advanced Marksmanship course. Staff Sergeant Chen gathered the students for the final briefing and announcement of results. As she read through the final standings, Maria felt her heart beating faster with each name that wasn't hers. First place overall, and recommended for immediate assignment to the Marine Corps shooting team, Lance Corporal Maria Santos. The announcement represented the achievement of a goal that had seemed impossible 18 months earlier. Maria Santos, who had learned to shoot on her uncle's ranch and had served coffee at a small-town diner, was about to become one of the elite marksmen representing the United States Marine Corps in international competition. As she shook hands with instructors and received congratulations from fellow students, Maria thought about the phone call she would make to her mother that evening. Rosa Santos would be proud, but she probably wouldn't fully understand the significance of what her daughter had achieved. Maria also thought about Staff Sergeant Williams, the recruiter who had seen potential in a young woman wiping down tables in Bakersfield. His instinct about her character and ability had changed her life in ways neither of them could have imagined at the time. But, mostly, Maria thought about the future. Making the shooting team was an achievement, but it was also a beginning. She would soon be competing against the best marksmen from around the world, representing not just herself but the entire Marine Corps. The girl from California was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had proven she could compete at the highest levels, but the real tests were still to come. In a few weeks, she would discover what it meant to perform on the world stage, where the pressure would be greater than anything she had experienced so far. Maria Santos had found her calling, and she was about to find out just how far that calling would take her. The Marine Corps shooting team facility at Quantico was a world apart from anything Maria had experienced in her military career. The building housed some of the most advanced training equipment available anywhere, with computer-controlled target systems that could simulate any environmental condition and indoor ranges that replicated the acoustics and lighting of major international venues. Maria's new teammates were Marines who had already proven themselves in world-class competition. Sergeant First Class Thompson had won individual medals at the World Military Games. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez held multiple national records and had represented the United States in 4 international championships. These were Marines who had dedicated their entire careers to achieving shooting excellence at the highest levels. The team coach was Master Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Hayes, a legendary figure in military shooting sports. Hayes had competed professionally for 15 years before becoming a coach, and she understood both the technical and psychological demands of international competition better than anyone in the Marine Corps. "Santos, welcome to the team," Hayes said during Maria's first meeting with her new coach. "I've reviewed your training records from the Advanced Marksmanship course. Your technical skills are excellent, but competing on the world stage requires more than just the ability to hit targets accurately." Hayes explained that international competition involved pressures that couldn't be replicated in training. Television cameras, large crowds, and the knowledge that their performance would be analyzed by shooting experts around the world created psychological challenges that had derailed many talented marksmen. "My job is to prepare you mentally as well as technically for what you're going to face. In 6 months, you'll be competing in Switzerland against shooters who have been representing their countries for decades. Some of them started shooting competitively before you were born." Maria's training regimen with the shooting team was more demanding than anything she had previously experienced. Each day began at 0500 with physical fitness training designed to improve the stamina and stability that supported precise shooting. This was followed by technical training sessions that focused on equipment maintenance, ballistics calculations, and range procedures. The afternoon sessions were devoted to actual shooting practice, but at a level of intensity that separated team training from normal marksmanship instruction. Maria would fire hundreds of rounds each day, working on specific techniques until they became completely automatic. Every shot was recorded and analyzed using computer systems that could detect minute variations in performance. But the most challenging aspect of team training was learning to perform consistently under artificial pressure. Hayes had developed training exercises that simulated the stress of major competition by introducing distractions, time pressure, and stakes that made every shot important. "Santos, you're about to fire for the team record," Hayes would announce during practice sessions. "Miss this shot and you lose your spot on the travel roster." These scenarios weren't real, but Maria's body responded to them as if they were, teaching her to maintain technical precision even when her heart rate elevated and her muscles tensed. Maria's first major competition as a team member was a national championship held at Camp Perry, Ohio. The event drew the best military and civilian shooters from across the United States, and it would serve as a selection match for the international team that would represent America in Switzerland. The scale of the competition was unlike anything Maria had experienced. Hundreds of competitors filled multiple ranges, with electronic scoreboards displaying real-time results and spectators following their favorite shooters throughout the match. Professional photographers captured every shot, and television crews interviewed leading competitors between stages. Maria felt overwhelmed by the scope and intensity of the event, but Hayes had prepared her for exactly this reaction. "The first time you compete at this level, everything will seem bigger and more important than it really is," Hayes had explained during training. "Your job is to focus on the fundamentals that you've practiced thousands of times. Trust your preparation and execute one shot at a time." The competition format required shooters to engage targets at multiple distances over 3 days, with cumulative scores determining final standings. Maria's position on the international team would depend not just on her overall performance, but on how she ranked compared to other Marine Corps team members. The first day focused on precision shooting at 300 and 600 yards, distances where Maria felt confident about her abilities. She approached the firing line with systematic preparation that had become routine, checking her equipment, recording environmental conditions, and mentally rehearsing her shooting sequence. Her first string of shots at 300 yards was nearly perfect, with 9 10s and 1 9 that struck just outside the inner ring. The second string was even better, with 10 consecutive shots in the center of the target. Maria was shooting well, but she could see from the electronic scoreboards that many competitors were achieving similar results. The 600-yard portion of the competition was more challenging due to wind conditions that changed throughout the day. Maria's ability to read environmental factors and make accurate adjustments became crucial as other shooters struggled with the variable conditions. She finished the first day in third place overall, behind 2 civilian shooters who had been competing internationally for over a decade. Among military competitors, she was in first place, which positioned her well for selection to the international team. The second day tested long-range precision at 1,000 yards, where small errors in technique or judgment were magnified dramatically. This was the portion of the competition that would separate good shooters from great ones, and Maria knew that her performance here would largely determine her final standing. Weather conditions were challenging, with gusty winds that required constant adjustment of aiming points. The electronic wind flag showed patterns that changed every few minutes, making it impossible to establish a consistent sight setting for the entire string of shots. Maria approached each shot as an individual problem to be solved. She would study the wind conditions, make her ballistic calculations, and fire only when she was confident of success. This methodical approach meant she fired more slowly than some competitors, but her hit percentage was consistently higher. Her first 10-shot string at 1,000 yards produced 7 10s and 3 9s, an excellent score under the conditions. The second string was even better, with 8 10s and 2 9s that moved her into second place overall. Maria was shooting better than she ever had in competition, but she was also discovering that her best might not be enough to guarantee victory. The final day would determine team selection and final standings. Maria would need to maintain her high level of performance while dealing with the additional pressure of knowing that her entire future with the shooting team might depend on how she performed over the next few hours. She spent the evening before the final day reviewing her performance notes and mentally preparing for what she knew would be the most challenging competition of her career so far. Maria had learned to use systematic preparation as a way of managing competitive anxiety, turning nervous energy into focused determination. The final day dawned with perfect weather conditions, no wind, clear skies, and comfortable temperatures. These were the conditions that would allow shooters to perform at their absolute best, which meant that technical execution would be more important than environmental adaptation. Maria's first stage was precision shooting at 200 yards, a distance where perfect scores were expected rather than exceptional. She settled into her position with confidence, knowing that this was where her natural talent gave her the greatest advantage. Her first shot was a perfect 10. Her second shot was slightly to the left, still a 10 but not centered. Maria made a tiny adjustment to her sight setting and continued shooting. Shot after shot found the center of the target, building the kind of score that would keep her in contention for team selection. As the day progressed through longer distances, Maria maintained the systematic approach that had served her well throughout the competition. She treated each shot as part of a larger plan rather than focusing on individual results, which helped her maintain consistency even as the pressure mounted. The final stage was again at 1,000 yards, where Maria would need to shoot well to secure her position on the international team. As she prepared for this final test, she was aware that spectators had gathered behind the firing line to watch the conclusion of the competition. Television cameras were recording every shot, and electronic displays showed real-time scores that made it impossible to ignore how close the competition had become. Maria blocked out these distractions and focused on the fundamentals she had practiced thousands of times in training. Her first shot at 1,000 yards was a perfect 10, settling her nerves and establishing the rhythm she would need for the remaining shots. Shot after shot, Maria executed the techniques that had become automatic through months of intense practice. She was shooting the best string of her competitive career, maintaining precision that amazed even experienced observers who had watched many world-class marksmen compete. When the final shot was fired and scores were calculated, Maria Santos had achieved something remarkable for a Marine with less than 2 years of competitive experience. She had finished second overall in the national championship, behind only a civilian shooter who held multiple world records. More importantly, she had secured her position on the international team that would represent the United States and Switzerland. Maria Santos, who had learned to shoot on her uncle's ranch in California, would be competing against the best marksmen from around the world. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hayes congratulated Maria on her performance, but also reminded her that the real test was still ahead. "Santos, you've proven you can compete at the national level, but international competition is different. You'll be representing not just the Marine Corps, but the entire United States. The pressure will be greater than anything you've experienced, and your opponents will be shooters who have been preparing for this competition their entire careers." 2 months later, Maria found herself on a plane to Switzerland, carrying equipment cases that contained some of the most precise rifles ever manufactured. The international championship would feature competitors from 30 countries, including Olympic medal winners and world record holders who had dominated the sport for decades. The venue in Switzerland was unlike anything Maria had imagined. The shooting complex had been built specifically for major international competitions, with ranges that met the highest technical standards and facilities that could accommodate thousands of spectators. Electronic scoreboards visible throughout the venue would display real-time results in multiple languages. During practice sessions before the competition began, Maria observed her international opponents and realized she was facing a level of competition that was completely different from anything she had encountered in American events. These shooters moved with the confidence of athletes who had been competing at the world level for years, and their practice sessions demonstrated technical skill that was truly extraordinary. Maria felt intimidated for the first time since beginning her competitive career, but she remembered Hayes's advice about managing pressure through systematic preparation. She focused on her own equipment and techniques rather than worrying about her opponent's abilities. The opening ceremony was held in an auditorium that seated over 2,000 people, with competitors from each country introduced individually to an international audience. When Maria's name was announced as a representative of the United States Marine Corps, she walked onto the stage knowing that millions of people around the world would be watching her performance over the next 3 days. The competition format was similar to events Maria had shot in the United States, but the scale and intensity were magnified dramatically. Every shot would be recorded by multiple camera angles and analyzed by shooting experts providing commentary for television audiences. Electronic wind sensors provided real-time data that was displayed for competitors and spectators alike. Maria's first day of competition was steady rather than spectacular. She shot scores that were competitive but not exceptional, finishing in 8th place overall after precision events at shorter distances. Her performance was respectable for a first-time international competitor, but she knew she would need to improve significantly to have any chance of earning a medal. The pressure of international competition was affecting her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The constant awareness that her performance was being watched and analyzed made it difficult to achieve the relaxed concentration that had always been her strength. Maria was trying too hard to shoot perfectly instead of trusting the techniques that had brought her to this level. That evening, she called Master Gunnery Sergeant Hayes for advice on managing the psychological challenges she was facing. "Santos, you're experiencing what every shooter goes through in their first major international competition. You're thinking about the magnitude of the event instead of focusing on the simple task of putting bullets where you want them to go." Hayes reminded Maria of training exercises where she had performed exceptionally well under artificial pressure. "Remember that every shot is just one bullet finding one target. It doesn't matter whether you're shooting in Switzerland or on a practice range at Quantico. The fundamentals are exactly the same." The conversation helped Maria refocus on the process rather than the outcome. She had trained for months to develop techniques that would work under any conditions. Now she needed to trust that preparation instead of being overwhelmed by the significance of the competition. The second day of competition would test long-range precision, where Maria's strengths as a marksman would be most apparent. She approached the firing line with renewed confidence, determined to shoot the way she had trained rather than being intimidated by the international setting. Her first string at 1,000 meters was the best shooting of her competitive career. Shot after shot found the center of the target with precision that impressed even veteran international competitors. Maria was finally shooting at the level she had demonstrated in training, and the results moved her dramatically up the standings. By the end of the second day, Maria had climbed to third place overall, within striking distance of a medal position that seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. Her performance had caught the attention of international media, who were fascinated by the story of a young American Marine who had risen to world-class competition in less than 2 years. The final day would determine medal winners and establish Maria's reputation as an international competitor. She had already exceeded every expectation by reaching medal contention, but now she faced the ultimate test of performing under maximum pressure when everything she had worked for was on the line. As Maria prepared her equipment for the final day of competition, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been serving coffee in a small-town diner. Now she was preparing to compete for a world championship medal against the finest marksman on earth. She had learned that talent alone wasn't enough at this level. Mental toughness, systematic preparation, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure were just as important as technical shooting skills. Maria had developed all of these attributes, but she was about to discover whether they were enough to succeed on the world's biggest stage. The final day of competition would test everything she had learned about shooting, about competition, and about herself. Maria Santos was ready to find out what she was truly capable of when everything was on the line. The bronze medal from the World Championships hung in Maria's quarters at Quantico, a constant reminder of how far she had traveled from that diner in Bakersfield. But 6 months after returning from Switzerland, Maria found herself facing a different kind of challenge. The shooting team was being deployed to Camp Pendleton for specialized training that would test their skills in combat-realistic conditions rather than the controlled environment of competitive ranges. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hayes had designed the training exercise to bridge the gap between competitive shooting and real-world military applications. Team members would need to demonstrate their marksmanship skills under conditions that simulated actual combat scenarios, where perfect visibility and ideal weather couldn't be guaranteed. "The enemy doesn't wait for perfect conditions," Hayes explained to the assembled team. "You've all proven you can shoot expertly when everything is set up for your success. Now we need to know you can maintain that level of performance when conditions are working against you." The training would culminate in a night exercise where team members would engage targets in limited visibility conditions. Various environmental factors would be introduced to test their ability to adapt their technique to challenging circumstances. Performance during this exercise would determine assignments for upcoming international competitions. Maria approached the deployment to Camp Pendleton with mixed feelings. She was returning to the base where her advanced training had begun, but now she was coming back as a proven international competitor. The Marines she would be training with were some of the finest marksmen in the Corps, and she knew that her performance would be measured against the highest standards. The first week of training focused on adapting competitive shooting techniques to field conditions. Instead of shooting from prepared positions on flat ranges, team members engaged targets from improvised positions in varied terrain. They practiced shooting while wearing full combat equipment, which affected their stability and comfort compared to the lightweight gear used in competition. Maria discovered that her systematic approach to problem solving served her well in these challenging conditions. While some team members struggled to adapt techniques that worked perfectly in competition to the demands of field shooting, Maria treated each new scenario as a problem to be analyzed and solved. When shooting from an awkward position behind cover, she would take time to find the most stable configuration possible before attempting to engage targets. When visibility was reduced by terrain features, she would use her spotting scope to study conditions carefully before making sight adjustments. Her patient, methodical approach produced consistent results even when conditions were far from ideal. The training progressively increased in difficulty as the week continued. Team members shot in rain, wind, and extreme temperatures that tested both their technical skills and their ability to maintain concentration under physical stress. Maria's performance remained strong throughout these challenges, earning recognition from instructors who had worked with many world-class marksmen. Sergeant First Class Thompson, her teammate and mentor, observed Maria's development with professional interest. "Santos, you've got something that can't be taught. Some people get better when conditions get worse, and you're one of those shooters. Most marksmen, even excellent ones, see their performance decline when variables are introduced. You seem to thrive on the challenge." Thompson's observation proved prophetic as the training week culminated in the exercise that would test everyone's abilities under the most challenging conditions possible. October weather in California can be unpredictable, but the evening of the final exercise brought conditions that exceeded even Hayes' expectations for challenging training scenarios. A thick marine layer had rolled in from the Pacific Ocean, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards in most areas of the range complex. Combined with the darkness of a moonless night, the fog created an environment where even identifying targets became difficult. Hayes gathered the shooting team for a final briefing before the exercise began. "Tonight's conditions are about as challenging as you'll ever face. Visibility is severely limited, wind patterns are unpredictable due to the fog, and you'll be shooting at distances where precision is critical. This exercise will determine who has the skills to represent the Marine Corps in upcoming international competitions." The exercise was designed as a progressive challenge that would test each team member's ability to adapt to deteriorating conditions. Shooters would begin with relatively short-range targets in areas where visibility was best, then move to positions where fog and darkness made accurate shooting extremely difficult. Maria was assigned to shoot in the third group, which gave her an opportunity to observe how other team members approached the challenge. She watched from the observation area as Marines she knew to be exceptional marksmen struggled with conditions that made target identification difficult and accurate range estimation nearly impossible. Sergeant Williams, who had won multiple national championships, missed 3 of his first 5 shots at targets he would normally hit easily. The fog was creating optical illusions that made targets appear closer or farther than they actually were, and the swirling mist made it difficult to maintain consistent sight pictures. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, holder of several Marine Corps records, had better results but was clearly struggling with the environmental conditions. His shots were hitting targets, but not with the precision that characterized his normal performance. Even world-class marksmen were finding it difficult to maintain their usual standards under these extreme conditions. When Maria's turn came, she approached the first firing position with careful preparation that had become her standard procedure. Instead of rushing to begin shooting, she spent time studying the conditions and developing a plan for how she would adapt her technique to the challenging environment. The fog was thick enough that targets beyond 200 yards were barely visible, appearing as vague shadows that materialized briefly when the mist shifted. Wind patterns were completely unpredictable, changing direction and intensity without warning due to the way the marine layer interacted with the terrain. Maria's first target was at 300 yards, normally an easy shot but now complicated by visibility that made precise aiming difficult. She used her spotting scope to study the target area, waiting for moments when the fog thinned enough to reveal the target clearly. When such a moment came, she took her shot immediately rather than hesitating. Hit! The second target was more challenging, positioned at 500 yards where the fog made it almost invisible to the naked eye. Maria relied on her knowledge of the range layout to estimate the target's location, then used brief clearings in the fog to confirm her aiming point before firing. Hit! As the exercise progressed to longer distances, Maria fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite the extraordinary conditions. She treated each shot as an individual challenge requiring patience and careful judgment. When the fog completely obscured targets, she waited rather than taking low-percentage shots. When visibility improved even slightly, she was ready to take immediate advantage. Her systematic approach was producing results that impressed the observing instructors. While other team members, including Marines with more experience, were struggling to adapt to the conditions, Maria was shooting as accurately as she did in clear weather. The final challenge was the most difficult: targets at 800 yards, barely visible through heavy fog that swirled unpredictably across the range. At this distance, even a small error in range estimation or wind calculation would result in a complete miss. Maria settled into her position and began the mental process she had refined through hundreds of hours of training. She studied the fog patterns, looking for indicators that would help her estimate wind conditions at different points between her position and the target. She used her knowledge of ballistics to calculate how atmospheric moisture might affect bullet trajectory. The target was invisible most of the time, appearing only briefly when the fog shifted in exactly the right way. Maria waited patiently for these moments, keeping her rifle ready but not rushing to shoot when conditions weren't optimal. When the fog cleared just enough to reveal the target, Maria took her first shot at 800 yards. The bullet struck the target with a metallic ping that was clearly audible despite the distance. Her second shot, fired when another brief clearing revealed the target, struck even closer to center. By the time she completed the exercise, Maria had engaged all assigned targets successfully under conditions that had challenged even the most experienced marksman on the team. Her performance was not just good, it was exceptional in a way that demonstrated mastery of skills that went far beyond basic marksmanship. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hayes approached Maria immediately after the exercise concluded. "Santos, I've been training competitive shooters for 15 years, and I've never seen performance like that under these conditions. You didn't just adapt to challenging circumstances, you seem to excel because of them." The other team members gathered around to congratulate Maria on her shooting, but their praise was mixed with amazement at what they had witnessed. These were Marines who understood exactly how difficult the conditions had been, which made Maria's performance even more impressive to them. Sergeant Thompson shook his head in disbelief. "Maria, I watched you shoot those last targets at 800 yards in fog so thick I could barely see them through a spotting scope. How did you even identify your aiming points?" "I waited for the right moments," Maria replied simply. "The fog wasn't constant. There were patterns in the way it moved, and I learned to recognize when conditions would clear enough for a good shot." But Maria's explanation didn't capture the full scope of what she had accomplished that night. She had demonstrated an intuitive understanding of environmental conditions that went beyond technical knowledge. Her ability to read subtle changes in fog patterns, to estimate wind conditions in near-zero visibility, and to maintain precision under extreme pressure represented skills that couldn't be taught through conventional training methods. The results of the exercise would determine team assignments for the next year's international competitions. Based on her performance under the most challenging conditions possible, Maria was selected to represent the United States at the World Military Championships, where she would compete against military marksmen from around the globe. More importantly, her performance that foggy night at Camp Pendleton had established her reputation as a marksman who could be relied upon when conditions were at their worst. Hayes included a detailed report of the exercise in Maria's service record, noting that she had demonstrated shooting skills that exceeded anything he had observed in his career. Word of Maria's performance spread quickly through the Marine Corps shooting community. The story of the young Marine who had shot expert scores in near-zero visibility became legendary, told and retold by instructors and competitive shooters who understood the significance of what she had achieved. 6 months later, Maria stood on the podium at the World Military Championships in France, wearing the gold medal she had earned in individual competition. The girl who had learned to shoot on her uncle's ranch, who had served coffee in a small-town diner, had become the finest military marksman in the world. During the medal ceremony, as the American flag was raised and the national anthem played, Maria thought about that foggy night at Camp Pendleton when everything had come together perfectly. She had discovered that her greatest strength wasn't just her ability to shoot accurately, but her capacity to perform at her best when conditions challenged everyone else to their limits. The journey that had begun with a recruitment poster left on a diner table had taken Maria Santos further than she had ever imagined possible. She had proven that with determination, systematic preparation, and the courage to pursue opportunities that seemed impossible, a person could achieve things that others might consider miraculous. But perhaps the most important lesson Maria had learned was that excellence wasn't about performing well under perfect conditions. True mastery was about maintaining your highest standards when everything was working against you, when visibility was zero and hope was fading, and when others were counting on you to succeed where everyone else had failed. That foggy night at Camp Pendleton had been more than just a training exercise. It had been the moment when Maria Santos discovered what she was truly capable of, and proved to herself and the Marine Corps that sometimes the greatest achievements come from the most unexpected sources. As she returned to the United States as a world champion, Maria knew that her story was really just beginning. She had found her calling as a marksman, but, more importantly, she had learned that no challenge was too great for someone willing to prepare systematically and perform courageously when it mattered most. The girl from Bakersfield had become a Marine who would never miss when it counted, and that night in the fog had proven it to everyone who witnessed something truly extraordinary.